Okay, good morning. Hope everybody had a wonderful and enjoyable holiday. So we're back in action. We are up to chapter 3, Perek Gimal of Shemuel Bet. And we're going to start here. It's on page 721 in the Rabbi Jonathan Sachs Hebrew English one, which is, you can grab it from over there. Julie, it's on the table over there if you want the other one. Yeah, that's the one that's right there. Yeah, there you go. Okay, yeah. So just to refresh our memory from where we were 2 weeks ago, we've started the book of Shemuel Bet, which is now getting into David HaMelech and his kingdom, the early stages of David's kingdom. David has a challenge before him that he's trying to unite the kingdom, because after Shaul had passed away, Shaul left the kingdom sort of to his son, I guess. Even though David was promised by Hashem that he's going to be the next king, there's still going to be a struggle, a tug of war about who's going to be the next king. The people from the tribe of Binyamin, who were Shaul's loyal followers, they wanted the kingdom to at least stay in their tribe. It seems as though, as we'll see from this chapter, most of the Jewish people wanted the kingdom to transfer to David. David actually ends up being king in Hebron, in the tribe of Yehudah, his people, for 7 years before actually ascending the throne for 33 years as the king of all of Israel. So we're in that 7-year period where David is struggling to get a hold of the kingdom and to unite the kingdom under his rule. And a lot of the chapter that we're going to read today, chapter 3, is going to relate to that idea, David's attempts to try and unite the kingdom together. In the last chapter, we met two very important people. One was named Avner. Avner was the chief general of Shaul, and he was trying to institute Shaul's son, Ishboshet, in a puppet regime, where Ishboshet, a very weak guy, would assume the name of king, but Avner, being the strong, tough general, would wield power from behind the scenes, and this way he would keep the kingdom of Shaul going on. His counterpart was a man by the name of Yoav, who was the chief general of David, and they got into a tussle, they got into a power struggle amongst each other, which ended up in bloodshed and hundreds of people dying in this, what started out as a play battle and then ended up into a massive chase. Among those people who died was Yoav's brother Asael, who was killed by Avner. This background is important because we're going to see that Yoav's going to take revenge against Avner in this chapter, even as Avner is switching teams to go from Shaul's team to David's team. So that's what we're about to read. I read this chapter and I say this is better than any TV drama that you could find today. It's regular, like watching a movie. You're going to see all of the stuff that's going on. So going to be very, very exciting stuff. These are the types of chapters that we love to teach in high school. The kids love it. People are dying. There's stuff going on behind the scenes. I mean, there's a ton of action. It's not great when you consider that it's all Jewish people kind of fighting with each other. But it's an exciting chapter to read and see how the characters, particularly David, react over here. We'll try to pull out some lessons that we can gather for ourselves. So we're at the start of chapter 3, like I said, page 721, Pasuk Aleph. The chapter begins talking about how the struggle between the house of Shaul and the house of David rages on. Vatehi hamelchama aruka ben bet Shaul uben bet David. The war between the house of Shaul and the house of David was long and drawn out. V'David holech v'hazek, but as step by step it went on, David continued to get stronger. Ubet Shaul holchim v'dalim, and the house of Shaul grew weaker. As the prophecy indicated, David and his kingdom would rise, Shaul and his kingdom would fall, and this happens slowly and gradually as the war between the two sides rages on. The text here goes on a slight detour for a moment that we have to analyze why it does this, to tell us a little bit about David's children. Vayivaldu le David banim behevron. During his 7-year tenure in Hebron, David gives birth to children. Vahi bechoro Amnon. His eldest is a man by the name of Amnon. La Ahinoam haYizraelit, who was born to one of his wives, Ahinoam. We know her very well. Umishnehu, the second child born, was a man by the name of Kilav. LaAvigail eshet Naval HaKarmeli, who was the son of his other wife, Avigail, who was married by David after originally being married to Naval HaKarmeli. And we learned about their struggle and their issues with each other. Eventually, David married his wife, Avigail, after he died. V'hashlishi Avshalom ben Ma'acha. His third son was a man by the name of Avshalom, son of Ma'acha. So this is a new wife that we never met before. A third wife for David. Bat Talmai Melech Geshur. She was the daughter of Talmai, who was the king of Geshur. So you see David is marrying into other kingdoms, princesses. We'll see his son Shlomo will do the same thing. A common tactic among kings to marry princesses of other areas to create alliances amongst each other. V'harevi'i, the fourth child he gives birth to, is Adoniah ben Chagit. Adoniah, son of Chagit, that's a fourth wife. V'hachamishi Shephatiah ben Avital. And his fifth son is a man by the name of Shephatiah, son of Avital, another wife that we've had. So slowly through these children, we're meeting the fact that David married many other women during the course of his tenure. V'hashishi, his sixth child, Yitre'am, le'egla eshet David, to another woman by the name of Eglah, wife of David. Ele yuledu leDavid bechevron. These were born to David in Hebron. So we find out about 6 different children that David has during his 7+ years in Hebron from multiple women. Now, why is this important? Why does the text tell it to us? Why do we even need to know it? And why specifically tell it to us here? Any thoughts? Why would the text tell us about David's children? Yeah, Julia.
Maybe building his lineage?
Exactly right. Why do you want to build his lineage? Because what does lineage give you, especially as a king?
Credence.
Gives you credence. It also gives you what else? Longevity, heirs, right? To have a strong kingdom, you have to have children who could potentially take over for you, right? So by telling us about David's children, it's basically hinting to us these are the potential heirs to the throne of David in the coming potential years. Now, what's interesting is the actual person who will take over is not here. That's Shlomo, because he's not born yet, because we don't have Bathsheba yet. So that's going to have to happen. But in the eyes of the people, David giving birth to children, each child that he has is another child who could potentially be an heir to the throne.
First of all, Michal didn't have any kids.
Michal is not mentioned here, and she's going to come up in the rest of the chapter. So hold on, Michal. Michal will eventually be cursed that she will not have children. Yes.
Well, I was going to say, it's telling that this is the whole goal of it because it doesn't mention any girls, and the chances that in all this time, 6 wives, not one girl was born. That's what.
Yeah. Also, the text never really mentions girls in general, but for that reason, exactly. Yeah. For that reason, what your legacy is carried down through your sons, exactly. Especially as a king, for sure. Yeah.
Also, I feel like it's showing that even though this whole war is going on with the Jewish people, he's blessed. He's still Hashem's on his side. He's having.
I like that idea also.
There's blessing with that.
Correct. That's a good idea as well. I didn't think about that, but yeah, as it's going on, Hashem is with David in the presence. Yeah.
The fact that there's bloodshed between 2 Jewish camps.
Yeah, a very good idea as well. I like that a lot. I want to add one other thing, and for this you have to know a little bit what's to come. Another reason why these children are being presented here, we said about strengthening in terms of heirs, but what we will find out is that 3 out of the 6 children who are mentioned over here end up rebelling against their father. They end up trying to steal the kingdom away from David. So the first of which is Amnon. He's the actual Bechor. He'll eventually be killed by his half-brother Avshalom, okay, in chapter 13. After Amnon thinks that he's going to rule, Avshalom wants to rule. There's also a big thing, Amnon rapes his half-sister. There's a whole story to that. We'll get to that as well. Avshalom is the most famous rebellion. He rebels in chapters 16, 17, 18, almost dethrones David completely, but eventually he's killed in battle as well, but brings a lot of suffering to David. David has to flee on account of Avshalom. And finally, after David passes away, when he's ready to transfer the kingdom to his son Shlomo, his other son Adoniah will try to steal the kingdom away from Shlomo and try to rule himself. And he'll eventually suffer the same demise. So as David is trying to unite his kingdom and bring himself to the throne, the text is sort of hinting to us that in this backdrop, in this climate, his children are being born and are seeing the struggle of a tense kingdom and things being pulled in all different directions. And that is part of their upbringing, which could be an explanation for why they all tried to steal the kingdom away from their father and rebel against their father David. A lot of difficulty and a lot of suffering and a lot of issues that are going to take place for that as well. But this is just getting hinted to, a foreshadowing of things to come. Yeah.
What do you mean their upbringing?
They're being born into a situation in which there is tension as to who's the king, and there's fighting. For David, now as they're watching their father fighting to retain the kingdom, so they're brought up in an environment of tension and infighting and who's going to be the king. That it's normal to do that. Exactly. Yeah. To a certain degree, they're looking at their father rebelling against the incumbent, who is Shaul and his family, and seeing him take it away. Now, what ends up really being the case is that David is promised the kingdom by God. These others are not. But when you grow up in the situation of power grabs, that could be something that is an influence on these children to eventually rebel against their father and try to take it away from their father.
David is such a tzaddik, and his kids weren't good. I really always have a hard time in history because then we learn every Jew, we have to love every Jew, but some Jews aren't good, right?
Correct.
I always have a hard time with that.
Yes. Well, I mean, for me, I think I look at it a little differently. I take comfort in the fact that you could be of the greatest caliber of people. It doesn't guarantee anything for who your children are going to be. The rabbis of the Gemara ask, why is it that the children of rabbis don't become rabbis? And in many cases, not only don't they become rabbis, they become very anti-rabbinical, right? They become very cynical. They become very, very antagonistic towards religion. Why is that? Well, there could be a lot of different reasons and a lot of psychology that goes into that. As a rabbi, that's something I'm very fearful of, but could be that they saw the dark side of religion and all the oppressiveness and all of the limitations and the prohibitions. And fathers who are rabbis can sometimes be very aggressive against their children about what to do. They don't let them make their own decisions, so they rebel. There's a lot of psychology, a lot of different reasons. No two cases are exactly the same. But the fact that you could be a great person and nevertheless your children don't necessarily follow in your footsteps is a reality of life. That's why every parent, no matter how great or not, has a responsibility to educate in the best way possible. There's no guarantees in life. Just take a look at Moshe Rabbeinu, right? The greatest person to ever live, Moshe, his children are nowhere to be found. His grandchildren are said to have done avodah zarah, idolatry. How could it be? We don't know. Because, it could be that's actually the point. That when a person is so great, the king, you're in charge of everybody, you can neglect your family life. Something has to give. Rabbis and community leaders give so much to the community, they sometimes neglect their own family at the same time because they're sacrificing for others. They don't have time to worry about their own children. So there's a lot of different things that go into it. I kind of take comfort in the fact that great people as great as David don't necessarily, it's not automatic that they produce children like that. And to another point is, what we'll see by the end of this chapter is even the greatest of people make mistakes. And David will misstep a few times in this chapter. And when you're that great and you misstep, the consequences are much more severe because of how great of a person you are. And that we'll try and see about the rabbis make a number of very, very striking statements about David in this chapter. Yeah.
I've heard that David has been criticized for his lack of parenting skills and not paying attention.
The text itself tells it directly about Adoniah. This is in Melachim, so we have a ways to get there. That it says Lo atzavot David miamav, that David did not criticize, he did not parent his child Adoniah. He was more free-spirited with him, and that gave him the opportunity to rebel. Yeah.
But also in English history, sons taking over for their fathers or killing is commonplace.
Commonplace, especially, 100%. And getting rid of the previous regime and just wiping them all out so that you have no threats, very common thing. And we'll see that pattern traced as we go through. Well, that's one of the things of monarchy when you don't have that. But we have it in different ways, right? When a new president comes to be, he very rarely retains any of the Secretary of State or Secretary of Treasury of the previous regime. They fire everybody and they bring in all their own people because you're going to govern your own way under your own perspective. They're not killing them, thank God. Yeah, that's true. But, anyway. But we will see, by the way, in Judaism, that's a big thing over here, is that David will get upset about the killing of the other regime. He's not going to be happy about it. Yeah.
No, just the minute you said it, I heard it as a lesson for ourselves, that it's not what you preach, and it's not necessarily what's right, it's what your children see around you. What books are on the counter, what TV shows are in the background, and you could be doing everything right, but like David was straight from Hashem, but his kids saw violence, so they learned violence.
Right. If they weren't programmed properly or didn't have the context of why that took place, it was maybe not presented to them in that type of form. 100%.
Just as a side note, I know just because it's fresh and I'm getting off topic, but
okay.
It was something David and I said walking into Charlie Sacker's funeral yesterday, how he did so much for the community and he ran so many things, but his family was always first. And many men who do that for the community ignore their children, and they don't have such great offspring.
Correct.
There's always fighting amongst brothers.
Correct.
And his family was first, and look at all he accomplished without neglecting them, with keeping everyone.
That's a very high level. It's not an easy thing to do, for sure. And you're right, it's not necessarily the norm. When a person gives so much to the community and makes them their number one priority, it can sometimes fall on neglect of the family, and that could be a lot of the reason why the family members rebel. Like I said, why don't the children of rabbis become rabbis? Because sometimes rabbis give so much to their congregations and to their community, they neglect their children. The children see their position as a rabbi as being the reason why they didn't have a relationship with their father. So they say, I'm not going to become a rabbi, or I'm not going to look. This rabbinics and Judaism ruined my family connection and all of the things that went on, and that's an unfortunate thing. But everybody has to navigate that in their own way. 100%. What?
It's funny. There's no formula.
There's no formula. There's no formula, and there's no blueprint. Yeah. A person needs a tremendous amount as you go on and as you parent longer and longer, and you see, I think when we're younger, we think, oh, I'm going to be the best parent, and parenting is everything. And then as you get older, and especially as you become grandparents even, you start to realize how much siyata dishmaya you really need, how much help and assistance from Hashem it really takes to raise proper and good children, because everybody has their own temperament. What happens around them that you're not in control of is something that you just need to be fortunate with, who they're friends with, who they come about, who they meet, where they want to go. I mean, they're human beings who think on their own. I mean, that's what it is. So, I mean, just put yourself, when we were children and our parents tried to parent us, they did as good a job as they're going to do, but we're free people, we're free thinking, we read books, we see internet, we do this, we do that, and we're going to make decisions on our own. You can't control. The hardest thing as a parent is to realize you don't own your child. They're their own person, and you can guide them and instruct them and try to create the best possible environment, but you need a tremendous amount of divine assistance when it comes to raising children the way you feel like you want them to go and the way that is the best way for them according to Torah mitzvot. It's crazy. The longer you parent, the more you realize, wow, I'm not in control of this. It doesn't make any sense why this is happening. It just is what it is. You're right? So, I mean, that's a very hard thing. No question about it. I wanted to point out one other thing about one of the names of the people over here. It's in verse 3. It's the second child. Mishnehu Kil'av la'Avigail eshet Naval HaKarmeli. So there's a couple of interesting statements that the rabbis make about Kil'av, because unlike Amnon and unlike Avshalom and unlike Adoniah, the other three who are mentioned right around him, who all rebelled against David, Kil'av doesn't. He's the second one, and he's never mentioned again. We never find him again. He seems to be a very loyal child. He doesn't rebel, and the question is, why is that? Why is he different? What?
Because his mother's Abigail.
Because his mother's Abigail. So what?
He's like the greatest woman in Tanakh, according to my opinion.
So it could be that it's because of Abigail, being that he's the son of Abigail, and Abigail, who we met, is such a strong character, and somebody who...
Is Abigail the one he kills the guy for in the battle, or no?
No, that's Bathsheba, that's later. Abigail, if we go back to book 1 of Shemuel Aleph, was the wife of this guy named Naval. Naval means a scoundrel. He was a disgusting guy. Somebody who wronged David. David came to kill him, and she stopped it. She said, please don't kill him. He doesn't know. And eventually, because of what Naval did to David, Hashem killed him 10 days later. And Abigail ends up marrying David, right? But Abigail is a very, very strong woman. a lover of peace, and somebody who ends up saving David from a catastrophic mistake. Had he come in and killed Naval and all his people, a private citizen, yes, who wronged the king, but at a time when he wasn't recognized as king, it could have completely ruined David's potential for becoming king. If people saw David and his people kill 300 people, private citizens, in their eyes innocent, it could have totally undermined David's ability to do it. So if not for Abigail, David probably would not have become king. So it could be that Kil'av is that way because of who his mother is, which gives us an impression that, we've been talking a lot about David, but David has 6 wives. Chances are who really raised those kids on a day-to-day basis. It was each of those women who really did it, right? And so Abigail stands head and shoulders above as the best of the mothers to really raise their child in a way that doesn't allow him to rebel against David. That's one idea.
You said it was the name.
Okay, so the rabbis note his name because we don't have time to look it up, but if you go to the book of Chronicles, Divrei Hayamim, which chronicles all of the children, this child doesn't appear. He appears in a different name. His name is Daniel. So the rabbis all wonder what happened to him. Why does he have 2 names? So actually they say something fascinating. They say that really his name was Daniel. Why was he called Kil'av? Because he was the scoffers, the mockers of the time were making fun of him that he was not a legitimate child. Because since Abigail was once married to Naval and then married David, there was a point of contention about who his real father was. Right? They were saying, this is not a child from David. This is a child really from Naval, because the mother was married to two men. And so what did Hashem do? Hashem made a miracle and made him look exactly like David. So Kil'av, he looks like Av. He looks like his father. Right. So the rabbis play on the name and say he looked exactly like David, to dispel any rumors that people may have had that he was an illegitimate child really from the previous one. So an interesting statement on the part of that. Others, the rabbis say, Kil'av is that he actually was so smart, he was mechlim, he would embarrass Mephibosheth, who's the other king from Shaul's lineage in halakha. He was a Tamid Hacham, he was a tremendous Sadiq, and he was somebody who knew Torah backwards and forwards. And so maybe that's the reason why he didn't rebel against David. One way or the other, either he looked exactly like David, or he had the wisdom of somebody like David. For whatever reason, that's why he was a unique child and never ended up rebelling against his father David.
Also, is he Daniel that was in the lion's den?
That's a different Daniel. No, that's Daniel who appears much, much later on. Yeah, different Daniel. Okay, let's continue forward because we're going to get into the teeth of this story. There's even more that you could say, by the way, about those Pesukim, but I think we've exhausted it. We're ready to move on. Verse 6. Vahi bihiyot hamelchama ben bet Shaul u ben bet David. As the war raged on between the house of Shaul and David, ve'Avner haya mitchazek bebet Shaul. Avner was the chief general trying to strengthen the house of Shaul. Ule Shaul pilegesh. Shaul had a concubine, Ushma Ritzpa bat Ayah. Her name was Ritzpa, daughter of Ayah. Vayomer el Avner. And he says to Avner, Madua bata el pilegesh avi. Why did you lay with the concubine of my father? Now, who said that? Yeah, right? It's confusing. Right. Who's talking? Well, who's the speaker, obviously, if he's saying my father's concubine? So it's obviously not Shaul. It sounds like it should have been Shaul, but it's not Shaul. So who's speaking if he says my father's concubine? It's Ishbosheth. It's Ishbosheth, the guy who was supposed to be the puppet king by Avner. So Ishbosheth comes to Avner, even though his name is not mentioned, but it has to be him. And he tells Avner, why did you sleep with my father's concubine? Now.
Can I just say something about her name? Ritzpah means
yeah.
war.
Kind of, yeah. I don't know if they had a different, there could be a different etymology of it, but yeah. Ritzpah bat Ayah. Not a very flattering name. No, probably not. Now, this is a crazy accusation on the part of Ishbosheth to Avner, because to sleep with the king's concubine is like the utmost level of disrespect. It's essentially how you show I'm taking over. We'll see this later on. Avshalom, one of David's sons, will sleep with David's concubines in public, in front of everybody, to make a public statement of, I'm taking over, right? It's a power play on the part of somebody to lay with the king's concubine, right? So Ishbosheth apparently got tense with this puppet regime idea with Avner. He wasn't so happy. Now we've noted that Ishbosheth is a very weak guy. That's why he's like, his name is erased, is not even here. He's incredibly weak, but he tries to make a play here and accuses Avner of laying with his father's concubine as a sign of, you want to take over. Now Avner is not having this. Avner is like, you should be thankful that I'm not doing that I'm letting you be the king, because in the end of the day, you're blood. So you have to take over. I can't do it because I'm not Shaul's son. He says, but this is the best that you got. You might as well kiss my toes for it that you get to be the king in name and just let me handle it. Now you're accusing me? So Avner is not happy with this. Avner is very, very angry. And in verse 8, Vayihar le Avner me'od. Avner was very upset al divrei Ishbosheth, by the words of Ishbosheth. Vayomer, and he says to him, Harosh kelev anochi asher lihuda. Am I a dog's head from Judah? In other words, is that how you treat me after I put you in as the king and I'm basically holding this whole thing up as we're losing day in and day out and I'm hanging on and keeping you in power? That's how you treat me? Hayom e'eseh chesed im bet Shaul avicha el echav ve'el mere'ehu. Here I have been loyally serving the house of your father Shaul and his kinsfolk and friends. Velohim tziticha beyad David, and I did not give you into the hands of David. Vatifkod alai avon haisha hayom, and now you're accusing me of having committed this transgression with this woman? Like, how dare you? How dare you question my loyalty, my authority, what I'm doing for you? Look at what I'm sacrificing on your behalf, and now you're going to do that to me?
Was it true?
Huh?
He hasn't denied it.
That's a good point, but he doesn't deny it. He doesn't deny it.
Was it true? Yeah.
It sounds like, had it been untrue, you come out and you deny that right away. He doesn't deny it, which sounds a little bit like it is true, meaning that Avner maybe felt he was entitled to Shaul's Pilegesh because of what he was doing, not as a way of claiming I'm the king, but as a way of recognizing his power and authority within this monarchy and what it's doing. Ishbosheth took it as he wants to be king and take over for me, and so they're having a little bit of a internal conflict with each other. And when Ishbosheth accuses Avner of this and what the ramifications are, not just what he did, but that he wants to take over as king, Avner is having no part in it, and Avner uses this as an opportunity to change sides. He's going to go and completely do a 180 to go to David. Look what he says in verse 9. Ko ya'aseh Elohim le'Avner. May God do thus and more to Avner, v'cho yosif lo, and he's going to add more. Ki ka'asher nishba Adonai leDavid, ki chen e'eseh lo. If I do not do for David as God had swore to him. In other words, he's taking an oath upon himself. I'm going to now be the reason why God's promise and his swear to David comes true. I'm going to bring that into fruition. Meaning that Avner knew all along, by the way, that God had promised David the kingdom. He knew that from the beginning, despite the fact that he still sided with Shaul. But he's saying, now I'm not with you anymore, Ishbosheth. Yeah, you're going to accuse me of that? I'm done with you. I'm going to change teams. But Avner really probably wanted to do that all along as he saw the kingdom diminishing and his power going away. He needed an excuse to do it. And he probably found his excuse in Ishbosheth's accusation. He's like, perfect timing. I'm going to hightail it over to David's camp. And that's exactly what he does in verse 10. Huh?
Is he welcome?
What do you think?
I think not.
Why?
Because he killed Yoav. He killed Yoav's brother. I just blinked on it.
Asael, exactly.
And he's been the one who's...
You're doing a fantastic job of keeping mindful of all the characters. There's a lot of people here.
And he's been the one leading this rebellion all along.
Yep. So this is going to be a big point. Okay, good. So I agree with you. And that's going to be Yoav's reaction. The question is going to be, what's David's reaction? So we're going to see. But he's going to make an attempt to enter the kingdom, the monarchy of David. Le'ha'avir ha'mamlacha mi bet Shaul, he says in verse 10, I'm going to pass the kingdom from the house of Shaul, u'lehakim et kised David al Yisrael, and to uphold the throne of David on the Jewish people, ve'al Yehuda, and on Judah, midan ve'ad Be'er Sheva, from Dan to Be'er Sheva, in other words, the whole land of Israel. Now, when Ishbosheth hears this, again, his weakness comes out. V'lo yachol od lehashiv et Avner davar. Ishbosheth couldn't answer Avner and his threats back at him, miyirato ota, because he was so afraid of him. Right? So because of Avner's power, Ishbosheth okay, do what you're going to do. Like he had a moment, Ishbosheth, where he thought he can attack Avner. Avner comes back at him with aggression, and Ishbosheth shrinks. So a terrible play and a terrible move by Ishbosheth. But for us, who we're looking to have David become the undisputed king, this sounds like progress, right? Now Avner is going to come and bring all his resources to maybe unite the kingdom, because Avner was really the one who was dividing the kingdom in the first place. Now the question is, what Julie pointed out, is Avner welcome? So let's see what he does. Verse 12. Vayishlach Avner malachim el David tachtav lemor lemi aretz. Avner sends messengers to David, saying to him, to whom shall the land belong? Lemor, saying to him, kareta beritecha iti. Make a covenant with me. V'hinei yadi imach. My hand will be with you. Lehasev elecha et kol Yisrael. And I will help bring all of the Jewish people to your side. Now, how do you think that sounds in the ears of David? Ridiculous? I think it sounds great.
But I don't need you. I have Hashem. I don't need Judah.
No, he needs
So that's a good point, but David has struggled now.
But it's 7 years that he doesn't have everybody.
He's seen a lot of bloodshed. He's seen a lot of struggle. You're right, but he's looking at it as, here's my opportunity. This is what David's been waiting for. Avner has been the one leading this annoying rebellion, and he's the one standing in the way of his united kingdom. Now Avner is offering a peace treaty with him and to help him unite the kingdom. David is loving this.
How do you trust him at that point? How do you
Good
know
point.
that he's being loyal?
That's what Yoav's going to tell him.
Right.
But David, I guess in his, you could call it naivete, or you can call it, maybe he says, this is Hashem presenting me the opportunity, and he's going to turn around and say, I'm going to find the good in this guy, and I'm going to try to use him to do it. Yeah, and his kingdom of chesed, for sure. So David's going to try to extend that olive branch and take Avner in. Yeah.
You know what I think is great? Like, he thinks like this is Avner is against him and it's horrible. It's been so many years. And look how in 1 second, one dumb little story that this guy makes a little. So that shows you like Hashem really, anything that's going on now in the world, he could cause one little thing
Yeah.
to make someone change.
Like, turn everything around.
And
Yeah.
everybody turn around in a minute.
100%. Like that.
One comment.
Right. But to Grace's point, you have to be open to be willing to accept that change, right? That's David's greatness over here. David could have easily turned around and said, 5 years, you're doing all this terrible stuff. You killed this person. You made fights. You this and that. Now you want on my team? Get out of here.
Yeah, I was doing that.
Right. But that's all of us would do that. And how can we trust him? And that's a reasonable, statement to make. But David, having known his promise from Hashem and being open to an empire of kindness, a kingdom of kindness, he's willing to take that chance.
Learning a lot from him.
Yeah, 100%.
This is a major step.
100%. But you'll see David will just fall a little bit short. A little bit. You'll see. One tiny thing he doesn't do. Yeah.
Why does it say Lemor twice?
It sounds like Lemi Haaretz. It sounds like maybe there were multiple messengers that he kind of went. It's a good question. He said to him, and then he said further. Like, I don't know, maybe it was more of a dramatic thing. I don't know, it's a good question. Let me click here and see if there's anybody who comments on the double lemor. No, because that's the type of thing you want to answer.
Jonathan Sachs just makes it and further.
And further. They said and further. Maybe he sent in the messengers in stages to kind of soften the blow a little bit. That could be one reason. I'll take a look into it and see if anybody says anything. Verse 13, David's reaction, Vayomer Tov. David says good. But now David, to test the metal a little bit, right? He doesn't just take him in right away. He has a job. He has a test for Avner. He says, Ani echrot itcha berit. Yes, I will make a covenant with you. Ach davar echad anochi shoel meitcha lemor. There's one thing that I ask of you to do. What is that thing? Lo tir'e et panai. I don't want to see your face. Ki im lifneh hevi'acha et Michal bat Shaul bevo'acha lir'ot et panai. Until you bring me Michal, the daughter of Shaul, to come and see me with you. So I'm willing to make a covenant with you, but you got to bring me my wife.
But he doesn't like her.
So that's a good point, right? Notice how he calls her what? Michal bat Shaul, the daughter of Shaul. Not Michal Ishti. Now you're going to see he's going to use a different language in the next pasuk. So keep it on the back burner for just a minute. But he's telling Avner, if you want to prove to me that you're willing to be on my side, you need to bring me the daughter of Shaul. Now why do you think that was the test?
Because it's another sign of loyalty that the house of Shaul has come on over.
Beautiful.
Now, I've got your head of arms, I got the princess.
That's really what's going to solidify it. Because why was Michal taken away from David in the first place? Because Shaul didn't want Michal with David because they were at odds with each other, right? And so as long as Michal, the daughter of Shaul, is not with David, it's a show of the separation between the two kingdoms. So David says, Avner, I'm willing to accept you to come over as long as you make the final step in uniting the kingdom, which is, I need the daughter of Shaul, who's my rightful wife. He doesn't say that, but I want her back. What that will show everybody is it will reaffirm my status as the son-in-law of Shaul, and a son-in-law can take over for his father-in-law, and that'll prove to everybody that I'm the rightful king. So it's a good play on the part of David. This is going to show him if he can trust Avner, and if the united kingdom is really what Avner wants over here. Now notice how David does not only leave this to Avner, but noting that Avner is going away from Ishboshet, he knows what's Ishboshet's mindset. This weak puppet king. He's losing Avner, his most important guy. What's going through Ishboshet's mind?
He's scared.
I'm toast, right? What's going to happen to Ishboshet? He's got nothing now, right? The only thing he had before was Avner. At least he had that to hold on to. Now he's got nothing. So David now makes a nice play to Ishboshet and says, Ishboshet, I want you to do it, so that you at least can with dignity transfer the kingdom to me. So look what he says in verse 14. Vayishlach David malachim el Ishboshet ben Shaul lemor. David sends messengers to Ishboshet, son of Shaul, saying, Tena et ishti et Michal. Give me my wife, Michal. Asher erasti li, that I had engaged her, beme'a orlot Pelishtim, with 100 foreskins of the Pelishtim. If you remember back when, how did David prove himself worthy to marry the daughter of Shaul? He killed 100 Pelishtim and cut off their foreskins and brought them back to Shaul. That was his dowry, pleasant as it may be, to marry the daughter of Shaul. So notice here he calls her Michal Ishti, my wife. Why did he all of a sudden change when he was talking to Avner, Bat Shaul, to now talking to Ishboshet, Ishti? Yeah.
Because it's her brother, or half-brother. Something maybe like he wants to feel warm and maybe like...
A little bit warmer, a little bit more...
This is not an act of war, this is love.
Respectful, okay. I like to suggest something a little different. To Avner, they know the score. Why does David really want Michal? It's a political play. He needs Michal to solidify his kingdom. He doesn't want to say that to Ishboshet, right? That's like a disrespectful, that's undermining Ishboshet's status at the current time. So what does he play to Ishboshet? He's basically telling Ishboshet, this is my wife. There's no reason why she shouldn't be next to me. It was a crime to take her away from me in the first place. So do the right thing and send me back my wife, right? He's playing to Ishboshet's moral side rather than the political side. To Avner, he plays the political game. To Ishboshet, he plays the moral game. And to each one, it's going to end up working. But as Lisa pointed out, what does he not mention anywhere here? That he what? What's his relationship with Michal?
They're estranged, basically.
Exactly. He doesn't mention that he loves her, right? I mean, that would have been something like, please give me back my beloved wife who I love so much and who I want to be with. That doesn't really come through over here because as we've noted time and again, Michal seems to love David more than David really loves Michal. David really cares about Michal and the status that he gives her, right? As the daughter of Shaul and being married to the monarchy so that it makes sense for him to take over. That would seem to be the whole reason why he was married to her in the first place. Michal doesn't see it the same way. Michal has always longed for David and felt that, she had a shot with him from a loving perspective, and that's going to end up being her issue that we're going to see later in the next chapters. She did save his life in an attempt to gain his affection, but that didn't seem to work.
Against her own father.
Yes, but that's why she also stays with her father and is put into the care of Palti ben Laish, who we're going to see in a moment, right? She was given to another man. Shaul gave her to another man because he didn't want her with David, because of their fight between each other. A lot of different things going on over here, right? That's why I said, if this is made for TV stuff.
Michal and Yonatan have the same mother?
Michal and Yonatan had the same mother. I think so. We don't know. I think so. I have no reason to suspect that they didn't.
And
Huh?
Ishbosheth,
Not that I know. No, Shaul's wives are not really mentioned by name. I don't recall.
Right, so all of his kids, we don't know if they really have siblings or real siblings. Doesn't matter.
No, doesn't matter for this purpose. Yes, Ishbosheth seems to be from a different mother. That's what I think. Yeah, they're more focused on the fact that they're Ben Shaul than anything else. So what happens in verse 15? Ishbosheth agrees. Vayishlach Ishbosheth vayikacheha me'im ish me'im Paltiel ben Laish. Ishbosheth sends for her, takes her from her husband me'im ish, from a man, right, from the person whom she was in his care. Again, we said the relationship between Michal and this man, Paltiel ben Laish, was a matter of major dispute amongst the rabbis. Was she really with them together? Did they just take care of her? Whatever it was. A lot of different approaches to it. We'll go with the rabbinic approach that they were given to be husband and wife, but given the fact that Michal was really married to David, Paltiel was not willing to accept that, and they actually lived together, but completely separate from each other. Never having slept together, never having lived together as husband and wife, but they obviously grew together. Vayikachem im ish mi'im Paltiel ben Laish. Vayelech ita isha. The pasuk says her husband walked with her. Haloch ubacho ahareha ad bachurim. Walking and weeping and crying as he followed her until Bahurim. Vayomer elav Avner. Avner says to him, Lech shuv. Go. Get out of here. Vayashov. And Paltiel ben Laish goes away. So leaving the rabbinic interpretation aside from a minute, what is the image that you gather here in this situation?
Somebody else, and she moved on, and now they're taking her back together.
Exactly. And the fact that he's weeping over her shows the affectionate relationship that he at least has for her, right? What's interesting is, what don't we see from her?
Well, that's
She's not crying back.
She's not crying back, right? Vayikaheha means like a little bit against her will, right? So there's a little bit of a interesting, in between the lines over here. What exactly is happening over here? Does Michal really want to go back to David? I think you get a sense that Michal is hoping for the possibility that David is calling for her back. Maybe there's a shot that they can reignite a spark between the two of them and maybe fall in love again. At the same time, she has actually fallen in love, or at least from the husband's perspective, he has fallen in love with her and is weeping as he's giving her up. But nobody cares about that. He says, get out of here and let's go, right? The political play is a little bit more. There's a certain sadness over here. There's a certain feeling that the text might be critical of what David is doing over here. David is pulling apart two people who have a relationship for each other, a certain affection for each other, and is not empathetic to the pain which he is going to potentially feel. Now, one indication that maybe there is a problem here is that chapters later, David will come back to the same exact spot, Bahurim, and he'll be cursed. A man by the name of Shiv'i ben Gera is going to curse him in a terrible way at David, and David is going to be told not to do anything, and David's going to walk away, ashamed, right? It's possible that the text might be making the connection through the place that David suffered that curse because of the pain that he put Paltiel ben Laish through over here for his own political gain by taking Michal back. Now, while David has every right to do that, it is his wife, he has every right to go ahead, the callousness with which it's done seems to be the thing that maybe earns him some rebuke and some problem later on in the future. So we see how sensitive Hashem is and the Tanakh is to all of the feelings of every individual. Even when you do something that you have the right to do, if it pains somebody, that could come back to harm you later on.
So I also thought it was curious that he is not concerned with their relationship. We're gleaning it later on. Were they true husband and wife? Were they just housemates? But didn't seem to bother him. He doesn't inquire.
Who's him?
David.
Uh-huh.
And isn't it the Jewish law that if a wife sleeps with another man, she can't go back to the first
So
husband?
that's where the rabbinic interpretation has to come in. That's where the rabbis, I think, saw all of those problems, and they turned around and said, you want to know why he was crying over here? The rabbis have a very interesting way of spinning this. They say, you want to know why he was crying? Not because he loved her. He was crying because he lost the opportunity to do a mitzvah. In other words, every day Paltiel ben Laish took care of Michal and didn't sleep with her was a day he earned a mitzvah for resisting the temptation of being with another man's wife. right? The rabbis say he took a sword and stuck it in between the bed, between the two of them, as an indicator that if he were to cross over to her side of the bed, the sword would kill him, right? So the rabbis look at Paltiel ben Laish as a very religious figure, a very sacred figure, who refused to cross the boundaries of marital relations, and he's crying over the fact that he no longer has the zechut to be able to overcome this Yetzer Hara for himself. That's a very interesting way of revamping the story a little bit, but another lesson that comes out of it here. Basically, it solves the problems that you, Julie, were bringing up, but also gives us the idea of how powerful it is when a person can overcome their temptations, what that could mean for an individual and how we could look at them on the highest of levels.
Except that David didn't respect Bathsheba's husband.
An ironic thing, which is that David, yes, that irony is there as well, which is that it'll even highlight even more the contrast between that and David, who, even though the rabbis find a way to sort of kosher up what David did, you can't ignore the fact that what David did was shady, right? In some way, shape, or form. That's gonna exactly. So that contrast is definitely highlighted by someone like Paltiel ben Laish.
The adding of the El here?
What? Yeah, that could be also first he was Palti ben Laish, now he's Paltiel. They added God's name to him because of how sacred and religious he was. That's definitely a hint to that as well.
Well, he said it before Palti.
And Paltiel, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Let's see if we can move a little bit further. Verse 17. Udvar Avner haya im ziknei Yisrael emor. So after Avner fulfilled part 1 of his 2-part mission, part 1 was bring back Michal, which he ends up doing. Now he's gained David's loyalty. Now he's ready to execute part 2. What was part 2? Unite the Jewish people under David. And Avner does this faithfully. Udvar Avner haya im ziknei Yisrael emor. Avner goes to the elders of the Jewish people and says to them, Gam temol, gam shalshom. Yesterday and the day before that, in other words, for quite some time, heitem mevakshim et David lemelech alechem. You've been requesting David to be your king. So, in other words, not only did Avner know that Hashem promised the kingdom to David, but it seems as though there's been a lot of clamoring by the elders of the Jewish people for David, and yet Avner was still making a rebellion. Avner was still splitting the king. Now Avner goes to them and says, okay, I'm ready, right? Let's do it. Let's do what you guys said. Let's put the kingdom together. Verse 18, Ve'ata asu. Now let's do it. Ki Adonai amar el David lemor. For Hashem has said to David, Beyad David avdi hoshia et ami Israel miyad Pelishtim miyad kol oivehem. I will deliver my people Israel from the hands of the Philistines and all its other enemies through my servant David. So God has promised that. Verse 19, Vaydaber gam Avner be'ozne Binyamin. Now Avner takes the hardest jump, is he goes to the people of Binyamin. Now why are the people of Binyamin the hardest to convince? That's Shaul's home tribe. That's like going to the state of the president and convincing them to vote against the guy who is their person, right? So he's able to do it. Vayelech gam Avner ledaber be'ozne David bechevron. Avner goes to speak to David in Hebron. Et kol asher tov be'enei Israel, all of the good that people have seen now in Israel, uve'enei kol bet Binyamin. So Avner goes back to David and he gives him the good news. I got everybody. Everybody's on board. We're finally ready to do it. I've been successful. We can name you as the king. David is...
The whole time he's the only one who wasn't on board.
Exactly. Exactly. The irony. But it takes that one guy. So finally he gives in. David says, no problem, let's do it. Vayavo Avner el David Hebron ve'ito 20 anashim. Avner comes to David in Hebron with 20 men. Vayas David le'Avner ve'la'anashim asher ito mishteh. David makes a festive meal for Avner and his people. Verse 21, Vayomer Avner el David. Avner says to David, Akuma ve'elecha. I'm going to go up now and I'm going to go. Ve'ekbetza et Adoni hamelech et kol Yisrael. I'm going to gather all the Jewish people to my master the king. V'yichretu itcha berit. And they're going to all make a covenant with you. Umalachta bechol asher te'aveh nafshecha. And you will be king over all that your heart desires. Vayshalach David et Avner vayelech b'shalom. David sends Avner away and he goes in peace, unharmed. Great. Everything seems like it's going exactly as we planned, except that one person didn't know anything that happened. Who's that guy who's going to throw a monkey wrench into everything? Yoav. Yeah, what is he saying?
What's the timeline of this versus Asa was just, it feels like Asa was just killed.
It is. It's very quick. These events are happening in rapid succession. Yeah. Enough that Yoav feels the need for vengeance and he's going to take it out on Avner. Verse 22, V'hine avdei David v'Yoav ba mehagedud. Behold, the servants of David and Yoav, his legions, come from battle. V'shalal Rav imam heviu, and they brought with them much plunder and spoils of war. Ve'Avner enenu im David behevron. At that time, Avner wasn't there. He had left. Ki shelecho vayelech b'shalom, because David sent him away, and they had gone in peace. Ve'Yoav v'chol hatzava asher ito ba'u. Yoav and his army had arrived. Vayagidu leYoav lemor. It was told to Yoav, saying, Ba Avner ben Ner el hamelech. Avner, the son of Ner, came to the king. Vayshalechehu vayelech b'shalom. And the king sent him away in peace. He didn't do anything to him. They must have made some kind of a peace treaty. Yoav is incited. Verse 24, Vayavo Yoav el hamelech. Yoav comes to the king. Vayomen me'asita. He says to the king, what did you do? Hine ba Avner elecha. Avner came to you. Lama zeh shilachto vayelech haloch. Why did you send him away and let him go free? You should have done something to him. That was our chance. He finally came to us. Kill him right then and there. Yadata et Avner ben Ner ki lefatotecha ba. He says, don't you know that Avner came to you to seduce you, to trick you? He's deceiving you. He's a double agent. V'ladat et motza'acha ve'et mova'echa. He wants to know where you're going and where you're coming. He came to spy. V'ladat et kol asher ata oseh. He wants to know everything that you're doing. So Yoav tells David, you fool, you let him get in. You made a covenant with him. He just wants to spy. He's gaining all our secrets. What did you do? Now, David, notice in verse 26, he doesn't respond. He doesn't say anything. Vayetze Yoav mi'im David. Yoav leaves from David's quarters. Vayishlach malachim ahare Avner, and he sends messengers to follow Avner. Vayashivu oto mi bor hasira, and they bring him back from bor hasira. V'David lo yada. David had no idea about any of this. So Yoav sends the messengers to bring him back in the name of David, and he's hatching a plan. Verse 27, Vayashov Avner Chevron. Avner comes back to Hebron thinking everything's good. Vayatehu Yoav el toch hashahar. Yoav takes him aside within the gate, ledaber ito basheli, to talk to him there privately. Vayakehu sham hahomesh, and he strikes him there right in the stomach. Why is that significant that he struck him in the stomach?
That's what he did Asael in the back.
That's exactly what Avner did to Asael. He struck him directly in the belly, and the sword came out the other end of him. The text tells us to us. Vayamot bedam Asael ahiv, and he dies in the blood of Asael, his brother. So it's clear, why did Yoav do this? Revenge for his brother. Now that's important because Yoav, when he told David that Avner is spying, did he really believe that? No, he didn't really believe that. That was his way of, he needed an excuse to tell David, what did you do? Because he doesn't want to tell David we should have gave him revenge for Asael, because David's not interested in revenge for Asael. He's not interested in revenge at all. David's going to reject that outwardly. So he has to come up with a ridiculous claim against him, which David doesn't deny that claim. That's really the key. Keep that in mind.
Ridiculous claim.
Not ridiculous, right.
Said it was silly for him.
Ridiculous from where we're going. Yeah, yes, yeah. Well,
he doesn't know that he pledged his allegiance.
True. Yes, absolutely. So he makes a claim that David could buy. It's legitimate. David doesn't say anything, which means maybe he second-guessed himself. Maybe he had a little bit of doubt, even though he doesn't do anything. But Yoav really is in it for revenge. He doesn't care about Avner's motivation. He cares about taking revenge against him for the murder of his brother.
But isn't that like a thing that you're allowed to do, sort of?
What?
Take revenge for a murder of...
Not in this context, because if you take a look at it.
Like, isn't that the whole thing with the Irmiklat, so that the relative doesn't...
But remember what happened. What were the circumstances under Avner killing Asael? They were in a fight. They were in a war, and Asael was chasing Avner to kill him. And remember, we said that Avner tried to show tremendous restraint. He told Asael, stop chasing me. He told it to him twice before he finally killed him. So Avner did his due diligence to try and not kill Asael. It's unfair that Yoav would take revenge against him for not in battle, right? Yoav is looked at in a negative way from what he did over here. Yes, he does take revenge for Avner's actions, but it's not the same. It's not an eye for an eye over here. Much sneakier.
Self-defense also. Killing in self-defense.
Yeah, 100%. Killing in war and killing in self-defense is justified. Even though it was Avner who started the whole thing and he shouldn't have done it, so he was responsible, at that moment he had no choice. Yoav deceitfully brings him and plots him. It's premeditated murder, and he wants to kill him in that way.
Timing happens to be very good for this murder.
Really? Why do you say?
He got Michal, he Avner brought all the people, united the
Very
kingdom,
convenient.
and I would be suspicious of him.
You would be suspicious of Avner.
Yeah,
Okay.
I wouldn't trust him fully, but he did his job.
Okay.
We got what we needed out of Avner. Let's get him out of the picture.
Okay, so if that's true, no, it's good that you bring that up because David is going to look at this as horrific timing. Why now try to think devil's advocate? What? This was his friend, and what could potentially the people think about Avner's murder?
That David sketched him.
David plotted it, right? Because Yoav is the general of David, right? Yoav doesn't do anything without David's permission. Nobody knows that Yoav did this on his own. So you know what this looks like? David used Avner to get the kingdom back together, and when he didn't need him, he whacked him, right?
It's actually the worst possible.
It's the worst. That's what I've said. Everything that you said. Yes, from a
You're
perspective.
talking about optics.
Right.
And I'm
But
talking
optics is
about
the whole thing.
strategy.
But optics is the whole thing. Think about what the people of Binyamin are going to say now.
Right.
Avner was the one who came to them and convinced them, David is great, David is this, David is that. Now the people of Binyamin are going to say, now you just killed Avner.
Right.
What is he going to do to us? We're the people of Shaul. Maybe we're next. This is a ruthless warlord, power, bloodshed, hungry king. He's crazy. He can do anything. This does not look like good timing. So in fact, the opposite. David is going to go to great lengths to do everything he can to distance himself from what just took place. His whole rest of the chapter is a show of David separating himself from Yoav and distancing himself from Avner's murder. Yeah. I think we're out of time. So I know we're in the middle of a chapter, but I think we'll pause here. We'll finish out chapter 2 because there's a lot more to talk and I don't want to rush it. And Be'ezat Hashem, we'll go into chapter 4. These chapters are really loaded with events, but we're going to see now what David does to separate himself from Avner, save public face, and what he's going to have to maybe do or not do to Yoav, because he's got to deal with his general who just did something without the king's permission that could have made the king look really, really bad. And almost did make the king look really, really bad. So there's a lot of different dynamics that have to be solved here. We'll continue chapter 3 and move into chapter 4. Be'ezat Hashem next week. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.